Hey everyone, before we get to today's shows, I just want to ask you for your support. The UCAN Foundation has partnered with MoveOn.org to launch a petition that demands that Netflix and other reality shows put a disclaimer on the front of all unscripted shows. And that disclaimer says that all episodes are for entertainment purposes only, and any content can be edited, manipulated, and presented in any other way for storyline purposes. So please, if you can, check out the link in the description right here. Go add your name to support, and let's get this petition out to Netflix and start making some real change in the industry. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your signature. Now, let's enjoy the show.
I'll never forget, she looked over at me and she was like, do you mind if I say something about this church that's not, positive? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, your room. And she was like, I have to say, I think that you were in a cult. And she was being so gentle, but I just started to panic because I was like, if she's right, then I don't know what to do.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more, all to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open, which is part 2 of Surviving Life in a Cult with Callie Ezell, a friend of mine. But before we get into this week's show, make sure you like, subscribe, share the show. It helps us with the algorithm, helps us get the show out, and we've been growing really nicely lately, so I'd like to keep that up, and I thank you in advance for supporting the show. Today's episode is part 2 with Callie, and Callie is a Chicago-based abstract artist. She's the founder of Macmillan Street Art, and we were recently connected over the summer through a mutual friend, and we decided to do a podcast where she would share her experience before, during, and after participating in a cult. Now, this is part 2, so I encourage you to go back to the previous episode of the show to hear part 1, where we follow Callie's story through her own words and her own experiences, all the way up to the moment where within this program, her partner was being forced into gay conversion therapy. And she finally realized that that's something that might be a bridge too far and that it was time for her to figure out how to get out of this cult.
So I love this person and they are just going through hell. And this is wrong. This has got to be wrong. This cannot be right. They cannot be changed. I certainly don't believe they should marry me and go through the rest of their life not fulfilled. But I was terrified to tell anybody. And so I just sat with it. And it grew enough that I started to question other things and left.
So we pick up today right where we left off last week. We talk about her feelings, her experiences, her emotions as she was working towards an exit strategy to leave the cult. And we follow this through how Callie experienced integrating her life back into normality, back into meeting new friends and dating and finding new work and all the anxiety and stress and trauma that she carried from this 10-year experience she had in the cult. And eventually what led her to therapy, where she spent many years working on herself, discovering art and painting as a hobby and a way to express herself. Callie's very vulnerable in this, and this is an honest and true, authentic conversation about what her experience was. And I hope that this helps you view the world and human beings with compassion and empathy so that you can go through life, and we can all go through life with our eyes wide open. Welcome to this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. Our guest today is Callie Ezell. She is here for part 2 of Surviving Life in a Cult episode. And she's a Chicago-based abstract artist and founder of the Macmillan Street Art Company. So thank you for joining us again, Callie. And we're going to pick up right where we left off last week.
Awesome. Yeah. It's been wild since that episode came out.
I can imagine. And maybe that'll be some, yeah, we can touch on that too.
Yeah.
That would be cool. So I want to take us back really quickly here. We left off where you were in a relationship with a member that was in your program, and you had stated that he was being sent through conversion therapy,
Yeah.
and you didn't have any problem with him or any problem with his sexuality, and the church was telling you that they are adamantly against this. Take us back to what you were thinking and what you were feeling in that moment, and what your relationship was going through, and what your relationship with yourself was going through, and with the church.
It's so complicated. You're in a place where, and I mean, I would assume it goes without saying, but I guess also a lot of people haven't been in an extreme church environment before. And so I feel like maybe explaining this piece of it. So for 10 years, the expectation for me, and I was a credentialed minister. Like, I had gone through the entire process, gotten credentialed, all of these different kinds of things. And the expectation, of course, while you were in this organization, was absolutely no sex, no sexual thoughts, no sexual. For 10 years, I was involved in that and adhered fully to those guidelines. No impure thoughts, no impure actions whatsoever. If you were to kiss, you were supposed to only kiss standing up and with your mouth closed, essentially. That was the expectation.
Wow. Even when you're in an exclusive relationship with someone?
Oh, yeah. I mean, purity and retaining your purity, people were really celebrated if they did not kiss until they were married. People were super celebrated if they just yeah,
Jeez.
if they just held hands. And a lot of people ended up, of course, getting married very quickly, because even, they would quote this passage a lot of times that said it's better to burn with lust than to, give in to, these feelings. And so a lot of people would get married very quickly, even, without taking the time to sort of figure out, are we compatible? Is this a partner that I can really communicate with? Is this a partner that I can coexist with in a home? And do we live well together? Do we, all of these different kinds of things. You weren't taught to live on the side of reason. You were taught to, if the most important thing here is that you don't have sex before you do that.
And I grew up Catholic, so I had a little, not even close to the level you did, but I had a little bit of that. My dad's talk to me was, keep it in your pants unless you're going pee until you get married. That was his line there. So in some level I can relate to that, but I have to, you have to wonder, how are you supposed to find out those things? If you're compatible, if you're able to live together, if you're, sexually compatible, whatever that is, how are you, was there any conversation about that? Or was it just, this is God's word, this is God's way, and you follow it or you're unpure?
Well, I think a lot of people found that out once they were married, which was which was a really sad part about it, because, their relationships, that happened within this program and within that, world there, it was always super exciting. People would announce it, and, there was just there was so much to it. People that, were giving talks about healthy marriages had been married for 2 or 3 years. And, all these different kinds of things. I mean, it's not saying that's the only people, but I mean, I saw a lot of really, really, really difficult marriages happen. And I think that's any marriage, of course. But I mean, I saw a lot of really difficult marriages because they didn't know each other before they got married. They knew very little about each other. They knew very little about how the other person interacted, lived on a daily basis, because there were so many rules about, how to date and how to do all of this, that just kept that piece of the puzzle hidden, which, sure, I get the, romantic belief that that's beautiful and you save it for that. But it's also not very practical, and it's not very reasonable to, I would never, well, I mean, at this point, hopefully I don't have to have a roommate again, but
We're millennials. You never know.
you just don't.
I just saw a news story. I didn't read it because I'm like, I can't. I just saw one the other day that was like, millennials are moving back home to save money to buy a house. I'm like, what is going on? Like, we're going backwards.
Houses cost $500,000. So
I know.
But yeah, I mean, but I wouldn't ever have a roommate again if I didn't interview them, probably know them and know a little bit about how they lived and all these different kinds of things. And I mean, there would be a trial process to that too. And it's just wild to think that all of these things were just done. But anyway.
So I didn't know, this is going to make me sound stupid, I didn't even know what conversion therapy was until probably 2016, 2017.
Oh, I wouldn't have known either had I not gone.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good place to start. Like, from your perspective, what was conversion therapy, and why was your partner being subject to that?
Yeah. So all of what we just talked about to say that, like, sex wasn't on the table for me. So having somebody while I was in the program that I was dating who wasn't necessarily interested in sex with me either, but we were great companions. I mean, we appreciated each other, loved each other. We both talked about a lot of the same ideas, and I was a safe place for him. And I think he was for me too, because he was somebody that I didn't feel like I needed to be edited in front of. And him without me, him with me. And so, we would sit up at night and watch The Nanny and Oprah, old Oprah episodes.
Calm down, you two.
But like, also how it was so clear. He owned the Oprah episodes. Like, these weren't mine. And
were they like on VHS tapes?
DVD. I'm not.
Okay. All right.
But I do remember the switch from VHS to DVD. So I'm not that young.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, it felt safe too. I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to worry about, going too far and having to get kicked out, because I watched that happen to people. I watched people, accidentally have sex and not tell somebody for 2 months. And they had, it happened to one couple, and the poor girl, she had to stand up in front of all like 100 and something people. I can't remember if it was both of them or if it was just one of them. And she had to tell all 120 or 30 people that they had messed up and had sex, and they had to go home. And these were the consequences of their actions. So it was like every person in the program, it was
like a public shaming.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember that. That was so horrible. I was sick to my stomach. I felt so bad for them. And it was just another way, then I'm not trying to, again, one of the big things I wanted to make sure I didn't do with the podcast was I didn't want to over dramatize anything. Like, I know it makes it, or could make it, less interesting or fascinating. Like Nexium, they branded people, the people that were in the cult that drank, the Kool-Aid and wore the Nikes and the Hale-Bopp comment. It's not that,
right.
But it's these things that these really do damage people. And so to sit in front of, 120 people and say I had sex, which is super normal for somebody in their mid-20s, and they went on to get married and had kids and all these different kinds of things. And I remember that, and I was just like, that can't happen to me. I don't know what I would do. I don't have anywhere to go if that did happen. And so all that to say, he was a really safe place. And I knew, deep in my gut, but I had been told so many times that there was a way to, for God to heal people of this, to heal people of homosexuality, and to, give you the ability to like love the opposite sex and all of these different kinds of things. And it never sat right. It never felt like it's like somebody telling you that your blue door is red. You just are looking at it wrong, and you're just sitting there and you're trying to make it work in your head, and you're trying to, make that door be a different color, but it's just not. It's just that color. And so in my head, I was like, I tried so hard to convince myself that that could be true. It's like, I have to believe that. They believe it. Why can't I believe it?
And was it something you two ever talked about?
Yes. So the way that it all boiled down was, he worked at the church as well. He worked at the church, and I was in the program and was essentially at this point, I was working at the church. And we had been dating for about 2 years at that point. And he came into my office, I believe, or he called me. I can't remember which one it was, and said that he had messed up. And we talked, and it turns out that, he had just, by messing up, he had flirted with a guy. And I won't go into detail because that's not my story to tell, but there was just, he acted on, some of his attraction. And we talked in the car, and he sat down and spoke with someone at the church, and they recommended this counselor. And he started going to this counselor, and the more he came back and told me about it, the more I realized this person was like trying to pray away the gay therapy, and like to bring him back to childhood, and to bring him back. And all the reasons that they would give for people being in the LGBTQ plus community were, none of them applied. He had a great, family structure, good childhood, talented. And it had nothing to do with it. And so I just couldn't figure out, as it went on, as it, continued to play out, he would be going through these intense therapy sessions where, this person's trying to do, what's that therapy called, where you like talk to your inner child therapy, like where you talk to yourself as a child, and they'd place him at different places. And it was just messing with his head so much. And
It's almost like they were trying to deprogram him and reprogram him in the image that they perceive he should be instead of who he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then the therapist asked me to come in to a therapy session. And I came into the therapy session, and I did not like this therapist. I thought that he was a quack. And I just sat, and I think that was my first time in therapy, which sucks. And
Not a good first experience.
no. And he's talking to me in this session, and he's like, I think that we can, really get him healed of this, so you two can get married. And then a couple from the church like invited to meet us and talk about, our relationship, and talk about how we could make it, and all these different kinds of things. And I just finally got so fed up because it just felt like everybody was sort of dismissing him. And it felt like everybody was sort of just like trying to make it as okay as possible that he got to spend the rest of his life missing something. And so would I have. And they were just so okay with it as long as he wasn't with a guy. As long as it wasn't with a guy, we're happy for you two to suffer. We are happy to bless a relationship. He dated another girl that was super blessed by the church at the end. And I will never forget this. I was in the airport. This was after I'd left. I don't know if I think I'd started therapy at this point. I was sitting in the airport one day, just super randomly. Saw this girl walk by that had dated him after me. And she's walking through the airport, and I'm going somewhere, I think for work. I'm by myself, and she sees me, I see her, and I'm like, oh, hey, we're chatting. And as she's chatting, she brings him up, and I think that she's going to say, because I think he had started the process then of like being open to date men, because I think I had seen some stuff on social.
And this is, what timeline is this? Are you out at this time?
Oh, this is after I'd left. I had moved
Okay.
to Chicago. I had, I think I had started therapy at this point because each of them are 10-year blocks. I was in the cult for 10 years, moved to Chicago, and now I've been here for 10 years. And so she starts talking about him. And while she's talking about him, she's like, yeah, I hope that he gets his act together one day, or I hope that he gets his life together one day. And I thought she was going in a different direction. Like, I thought she was starting to say that I'm happy that he's just finally like not trying to, date women. And when she said it, my face dropped because I was like, that's so stupid. Like, what are you talking about? He is getting his life together. And I didn't know what to say to her. So I just, I don't think she was being malicious. I think she just, that's how she felt. I think, yeah, like I did once. And so it broke my heart to hear that though, because I was like, he doesn't need to get his life together. That's not, or nor has it ever been the problem.
Right. It's like he actually is getting his life together. He's living his true life that he's supposed to live. And I get goosebumps thinking about this because the thing that scares me is, well, two things. One, I don't think anyone should be at fault for being completely brainwashed. Like there are several studies, tactics to control human beings. We're like, it's almost like we're wired in a sense to be controlled in one way or another, right? Think about how society operates. And we all stop at a red light for the most part, right? We all look both ways before we cross the street. We don't commit crimes, or we know we're not supposed to commit crimes, right? We have those societal structures that kind of are, in a sense, a way to control us. And I'm not saying those are a bad thing, but that's how we're wired. That's how society wires us. So when you take someone and you put them in a society that's just operating differently, we'll say, right? It's easy to comprehend how someone could get caught up, because you get caught up in the norm, you get caught up in, you're a product of your surroundings. And so for someone to think that they can be changed, they can be saved, whatever that is, and to go through that process and take it to an extreme point, like it may seem crazy to someone who's on the complete opposite, but you slow roll into it. It's not like you wake up one day and you're like, I'm in a cult, I'm going to go through gay conversion therapy, and then I'm going to marry my best friend who's a woman. Like it's not like that happens. That was years of programming, years of influencing and controlling and brainwashing. So I feel bad when people have any shame or anything for this, because you really don't have as much self-control when you're with a manipulator or in this type of situation.
No. And I never felt, angry. I mean, if anything, I just felt it was really hard to just your heart to not bleed. Like when you would just see this person who's so wonderful and who could so easily just find love, who I believe now has, by the way. We're not super connected as much anymore. Obviously I moved away and he's living his own life. And, but I do think that he's found, some companionship and love. And that makes me really happy. And a group and a community of people that really like love and support him. But it was a long road for him. And, even one of the other person that I talked about, was my best friend, still my best friend to this day. And she went through the exact same thing, just in a different state, and was sent back to Illinois to go to conversion therapy. And, I just, got to, sort of semi-watch her engagement to her future wife. And even today, I just sent her a picture of the night she got engaged years and years ago, and the night she got engaged a few weeks ago. And gratefully, I got to walk through that process of her just like owning,
becoming herself,
after being married with 2 kids and things like that. And I mean, just it's so hard to watch that happen to people you love, but it's amazing to watch them like heal and like move forward and just go, I'm going to like choose love and happiness. And um, I think that is God's work. I really do.
I think that's fair. It's the triumph from the ashes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I forget, was this before or after you received that blog? Like, is this the first time
Years
that you were like,
after.
okay, so you had
Years
already,
after.
the seed was planted, and then this was really something that
Yeah.
sort of shifted your mindset. What was that like? How did you feel? Were you thinking of an exit strategy? Where were you
Mhm.
at mentally at this point?
So that's when I started thinking about an exit strategy. And around that time, I was really close friends with one of the executive team members. She was probably one of my closest friends at the time. She was one of the executive team members of the entire church. And we traveled abroad and we went on a trip together. And during that trip, and she was very much, at that point, really sure in her faith. And we were like family. I spent holidays with her and her family. We went everywhere together. We were just super close. And I thought of her like family. And she said the same for me. And we had just been at a conference or somewhere, and there had been a um, speaker that flew in there on a private jet. And as he was standing on stage, he was, wearing all these wildly expensive clothes. And while we were there, somebody had talked about the fact that I believe he had been charged with like assault or like some kind of like all these crazy things. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. And I found out his net worth, like he was talking on stage, like, I'm worth close to $1 million and all, like just bragging and all these different kinds of things. And I flew here on a private jet just to see you and all these kind of things. And I just was like, this doesn't make sense. Because where's that money coming from? It's coming from people who are paying for faith, paying for more of this product that's being sold. I mean,
You're like buying your salvation at this point.
yeah, or you're buying hope or all of these different kinds of things. I've heard the term hope dealer. Oh my God. I mean, there's just
what a scam. What a scam.
I can't. I get it, and I get that it's a fun play on words, but when it boils down and you look at the life of Jesus, you look at the life of the people who were the foundations of this faith, very imperfect. I mean, Jesus is not portrayed that way in the Bible, but the apostles and all of these different kinds of things, very imperfect. And then, but there's this consistent message of like, people come first, love and value people, lift people up, look for the ones who are hopeless, look for the ones who need these things. And I just kept seeing people taking, and I kept seeing the literal exact opposite just constantly. And I, in my head, was about to go fucking nuts trying to be the thing that Jesus was, but trying to do the things that I was seeing, and like trying to figure out how those two connected. And they never did, because they're not puzzle pieces that match. This faith that was being portrayed, this message, this, again, we talked about the emotional manipulation, the money, and the cars and the thing and the planes and all this kind of stuff. Those pieces don't fit together because it's not the same puzzle. It was two puzzles got put in a box, and you're trying to put them together, and they don't. And that will drive you crazy. And it did almost drive me crazy. And I brought it up to her when we were on this trip abroad. And one of the things that we heard a lot in the program, especially if somebody left, especially if somebody was questioning too much, asking questions, especially if they were questions that came across with a critical air, they had a critical spirit. And she confronted me on this trip, and I was talking about, I felt like it was really weird that he got up on the stage and was talking about his private jet, and that it seems like he got in a fight and maybe hit his wife. and, is now divorced because he cheated and all these different kinds of things. I said, that doesn't match up to me. Like I'm not saying people can't come back from that. I'm not saying there's not grace for any of that. I'm not saying having a private jet is bad. I'd love to have a private jet. Are you kidding?
I don't know. Did you see what's happening to Taylor Swift with her private jet? People are going crazy over her carbon footprint, which they should. But anyway, I digress. I was reading about that earlier today, and I was just like, oh my God, I had no idea. But yeah, I get your point.
Here's the deal. And this might be an unpopular opinion. And if anybody is very concerned about my well-being after this, I did just tell America I'm in a cult. So who cares what people think of me?
And I hate to tell you, but it's more than America. The show's pretty global. We got a pretty decent overseas following.
Well, listen, if people can hate me in multiple countries, then cool. But I'm just saying, I've never had to be in multiple states over the course of a week. Taylor Swift does, and she also gives a lot of money to people who need it. So if Taylor Swift has a private jet.
If anyone should have it.
If anybody would need that, because here's the deal. Also, imagine Taylor Swift getting on an airplane. She'd never get to sleep. She'd never have a moment's peace. She'd never get to turn off. She can't. She'd get attacked at the airport. There's no way. She's the kind of person it makes sense. This pastor, no one knows who he is. No one. Not a single person. And so, he might fly a lot, but I don't know. That's not it. And the problem I have with it is where the money's coming from and who's paying for that and what they think they're paying for versus what they actually are paying for. And there's problems with that all over the place. It was also another reason why I left. I started just finding out a little bit more about financials and how things are run. And the only thing I'll say is if you're part of a church body, ask a lot of questions. If you are a member and you tithe consistently, if you give 10% of your income to any organization or entity, and don't just read the books, don't just read the breakdown of the budget, ask what goes into each budget and ask why that stuff is being put into those budgets.
Follow the money. Follow the money.
Ask how much event speakers are paid. If you're having an event at your church and there is an nationally known, internationally known, if there's musicians, ask how much they're being paid at your church, in your programs. I have seen payments for weekends, speakers coming in for a weekend that were more than the price of a car, $25,000, $13,000. I have seen just crazy stuff. Just ask. That's all I'm saying. I'm not reporting anything. I'm just saying I'd ask.
Well, I can just from a speaker perspective, I've been paid to speak before. Okay. And what's my credentials? I'm a marketing executive that went on a reality show. And the money that is being paid for that is, and again, I have value. I'm not saying I don't have value, but would I've ever thought someone would pay that much to have me talk for an hour? No. So the fact that if it's something people do, and I'm very reactive with it, right? But if it's something people do proactively, you could talk, in a month, they're bringing in six figures. Well, of people who are poor, in some cases, especially if it's not like a business, if it's a church, you're funding that. Your 10% or whatever that dollar amount is funding, these pseudo celebrity, I guess, cult leaders.
Yeah. And here's the thing I'll say, because I want to be clear, I'm not trying to be some kind of justice warrior and burn things down and all of that kind of stuff. I'm really not. I just knew I gave $7.50 in the offering plate when I made $75. I would do that. And I knew single moms. I knew people would come in and there was this sermon that lives this saying that would happen in the sermon about give out of your need. They would say that during offering, give God out of your need and he'll give back to you tenfold. And I guarantee you there are people listening to this right now because I know a lot of you are waiting on this second part. And I know that you were probably quoting it along with me because we've heard it a million times. Give to God out of your need, he'll give it back tenfold. And the thing about it is that didn't happen. Like, that's not what happened. It's that these people were tithing to this, and this isn't just this church, it's all over. It's in these organizations. We were told we had to tithe, become members of the church in this program. If we got money, we needed to tithe on it. Even if it was like my dad sent me 25, I would tithe 250. And so it was one of those things like I knew that there was me in the audience. I knew that there were these other people in the audience, and I knew that there were people who were like sitting high on the horse in the audience. And those were the people who were board members, and they were the people who spent the most money in tithe. That means they were on the board because they were the top funders of the church, and the church can't lose them. Because if the church loses one of these top tithers who makes $1 million a year, they can't function. So that also means that those people who tithe that much money, if they make $1 million a year, they're tithing 10%. That also means that their voice is louder than yours if you're tithing $2.50. And so there's just so much to it that people don't know. And I'm not saying it's bad you get paid $25,000 or $13,000 to come and speak or do an event. What I'm saying is I don't believe the large majority of the people who are tithing know that, because it's not lined out, it's in a budget.
Yeah. And it's in a budget they don't want you to see. And that's the thing. Like, churches don't really want you to see where the budget is. And one of the things you said a few minutes ago that resonated, and again, totally different, but I grew up Catholic and we were a pretty Catholic family. My uncle was a priest. My grandma was pretty serious about it. I went to a Catholic school, and we were, and I had a similar journey to you where I started questioning things based on the contradictions of what the faith was actually saying. So like, for example, the golden rule, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm grateful because I live by that to this day. It's one of my, it's in my ethos to say, don't do something to people unless you would want them to do it to you.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And then do things for people that you would want them to do for you. But then I was sitting there and I remember like going through a divorce for my parents in the Catholic Church, and how my mom didn't go to church anymore after that because of the stigma. And my dad like kind of lived with it and went through the pains and the judgment and all of that stuff for the sake of his parents and us and all that. And then I remember I was in high school, and the ironic part that ties to this is I still went to church every Sunday. I was a communion minister. I was involved. I was a believer, right?
Yeah.
I was starting to question all of these things, like why does Jesus say, help the poor, give them the shirt off your back, et cetera, et cetera? But why do we not, why do so many poor people exist, right? And then, you go to Chicago downtown or something and you see homeless people. Or I knew, we grew up poor, economic struggles my whole childhood. And, I was thinking, I was like, well, where's our help, when we'd get evicted or something, or my dad had to, speaking of millennials moving home, my dad had to move home twice just for financial reasons after the divorce and being working class and losing jobs. And so I started questioning all this. And I finally went in high school. I think I was like 16 or 17. They were having a specific mass for homosexuality. And I was like, okay, because I hadn't been exposed to that until high school. Okay. Yeah. I didn't even know like really what it was. That's how sheltered I was until I went to a public high school. And so I knew people, and I was kind of learning about it and seeing it sort of play out and the shame that goes with it. And I was like, well, they're still, God's children too, and God should love them. And so I went to this mass and I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting because maybe they're not going to say that these people are wrong. Okay. And it was just kind of like this whole roundabout way of saying, you're not living your life the right way, but God loves you anyway, but you kind of got to get your shit together. Right. And that was the vibe. And that's when I was kind of like, this isn't lining up for me. And I don't think this is a representation of how I feel about human beings. And so it kind of like sent me on that journey. And now I don't have anything to do with it, but it's very easy to sort of poke holes in these types of contradictions. but not necessarily when you're living in it every day, like going to a Catholic school every day and having religion class every day and going to church once a week on Sundays and then going to church during the week with school. I mean, it's just this like constant influx. It's almost like propaganda. It's just, they come at you with this message over and over again. You start to internalize it. And for you to be able to sit there and watch and say, hey, these speakers are taking your $7.50, 10% of your income for the week, $7.50. And they're taking that from all of us so that we can pay that guy with the private jet to fly in here and give us a speech. Just to have that ability to sort of think like that and point that out, I think is super brave, and you should be proud of that. And especially after the pushback that sounds like it inevitably came.
Yeah, so I brought it, and it wasn't to just be transparent. We were at an event that we were supposed to go to, and this guy came in, and I felt like that was a weird thing, and brought it up, and I had been having doubts, and I had been, really thinking about the fact that like I didn't know why would God send people to hell forever that he loved? Like there were just so many of these, it was just all starting to break down. It was all starting to break down. And she, looked at me and, she was like, you have a critical spirit and you're on a slippery slope right now and you need to be careful.
Immediately the guilt.
And, things just started rolling, and I had brought up some critical ideas, and I was told that I needed at the end of I wish I could explain it all, but it would just take all night. But ultimately, I had been part of this program that came as a help program to the church. There was some stuff on the end of the help program that was not disclosed to the church. I was in the middle of just trying to create programs for single moms in the community. That was my job that year. I created a program. I was working with nonprofits to just help single moms. And the church did, focus on humanitarian work. I was working, Christmas tree for Christmas of Hope, for kids in the community to get Christmas gifts. I was just doing all of this stuff. And my faith was like very slowly breaking down, and I was just starting to see like the behind the veil, and I did not like it. I did not feel good. I was having trouble looking at myself. I did not think gay people were bad or wrong or going to hell. And I was just having doubt after doubt. And it came to the point where I just was like, I don't know that I can do this anymore. They then told me that I could come and work for the church, but they could not pay me. And I had to leave. I went.
What? Did they give you reasoning behind that? It's like, hey, you can work and we'll pay you, but now you're questioning things. You can still work and we're not going to pay you. Like, was that supposed to
they were getting
you?
Funding, and there wasn't really a place for me. And to be honest, I'm really glad it happened, because it just sort of gave me the ability. I got a job at Starbucks. I was working at Starbucks, David's Bridal, and as a makeup artist. I had 3 jobs because I was just trying. At that point, I didn't have housing anymore, and I moved in with.
So you had left. You had left at this point.
I left the housing. I was living with people from the church, and I started at that point to just be exposed to just normal people. I was working with normal people at all 3 of my jobs, and I was having a really difficult time integrating with those normal people. Like, there were crushes and friendships and people asking me to go drink. And I was like, I can go drink,
Right. What was your last, before and I do want to hear that integration part. I think that's super fascinating and interesting to hear from you. What was your last day like? Like, how did you leave? Who did you tell? Did they kick you out?
Well, it was slow. So I was still involved in the church for a little while I was working these 3 jobs. I still was like going to church because I didn't know, what else to do. And I wasn't ready to like leave cold turkey. But towards the end, I decided to move. I'd been working these 3 jobs for a while, finally started to make some friends. And I took a job offer to move to Chicago to Chicago. I got a job in the suburbs that was close enough that I could commute, and I was just ready to make a change. I was dating somebody And they, that was, you know, a tough part of it. I was dating somebody that had sort of left the church, and we were, you know, seeing each other, and I was just ready. I was like, you know what? I at least, you know, I have a boyfriend. There's somebody there. I can make new friends. I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of this town, or because it's not a huge town, and you're going to see somebody every time you go to Target or the grocery store. And I'm living, you know, with people from the church and all these different kinds of things. And I basically told them, like, I'm leaving, and I don't know about my faith anymore. And two people talked to me before I left. And one was the girl that was supposed to be my best friend, and one was the guy in charge of it all. And the girl spoke to me first, and I'm pretty sure at this point now, like thinking back on all of it, she told him everything. And I just told her I'd had these doubts and none of it was adding up anymore. And she was crying, and she just looked me in the eye and she was like, I'm just scared that you're going to hell. And I just think about that, and I'm like, how could you say that to somebody you love, you know? And then I just thought about that constantly, and that lived in my brain for so long. I would just be up in the middle of the night, and I was like, she's probably right. Like, I probably am going to hell. And I just felt so tormented all the time that I had just made this stupid decision. But my reason had started to my reason started to exist again. I don't know how to explain this, but all of a sudden it was like, I knew what the truth was. I couldn't feel what the truth was yet. I could not feel it.
You had been programmed too hard, like hard coded.
Yes. I could, as like somebody, you know, saying, hey, this is an iPhone. This is an iPhone 12X or like whatever. I don't know what my phone is. But that's an iPhone 12X. It's green and it's a rectangle. But in my whole life, I thought that was an Apple. And so, you know, it's going to take some time to just start identifying it naturally and to like feel comfortable calling it an iPhone, because I've called it an Apple, you know, for so long. And I thought it was an Apple well, I guess it is an apple, but like,
yeah. I get that.
Yeah. Fruit. And so it's just like I could identify the truth sort of, but I could not feel the truth yet. And that was really hard because everything feels wrong. Everything feels like you're doing something wrong, but I just had to force myself to do what I knew was the right thing. And that's really hard. It goes against your nature as a person, to constantly just feel guilty about everything that you're doing, because it is so different than what you were told to do for so long. And moving to Chicago was it was hell. I mean, I'll never forget, I was driving to work, which again, I was commuting from Chicago into the suburbs after I moved for quite a while. And I was on the interstate going to Schaumburg.
That's where I grew up, by the way.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Well, Rolling Meadows, it's right next to Schaumburg, but people know Schaumburg. Yeah.
I was at Woodfield Mall.
Heck yeah. Went there like every weekend.
It's the best. That mall used to be legit.
Yeah.
And I worked I was at a makeup store. I was managing a makeup store there.
Oh, wow.
And it was so funny, you know, and I was driving down I-90, and my dad had called, and I was crying so hard and just told him, like, I felt like I was going crazy. I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I pulled over on the side of the road because I couldn't see the road anymore. My dad told me, he's like, please pull over right now. There's no way you can see, like, as hard as you're crying. And I was so scared that I had, you know, that I couldn't, I was like, am I tricking myself? You know, am I like tricking myself that all this is true? Like, and am I like missing it? Like, am I really not going to go to heaven? Am I just wrong? I don't know if I'm wrong, but can you just please tell me, you know? And my dad was so great. And, you know, there was just so much going on. And, you know, it it was so hard to just try to figure out my brain at that point. And
yeah. Did you stay in touch with your dad and other family members? I know you had at the beginning, but they were kind of preoccupied with their own shit lives. Or was this the first time you had talked to him in a while? What was his take on all of it, and how was that relationship?
at that point, I really just thought that a lot of it was homesickness and I was scared to leave. I had not processed what was actually going on.
How could you?
I thought that that was what it was like to move somewhere. I thought that it was losing everybody in your community. I thought that it was, and not that I thought that, but that's just what was happening, and I hadn't experienced it differently. And so in my head, I just had to contribute it to the thing that made the most sense. And the thing that made the most sense was it's really hard to live in a city. It's really hard to, which it is. It's really hard to, do all of these things. What I know now is my brain was broken. I didn't know how to think for myself. The guilt that I was feeling had nothing to do with like moving. It's like guilt and shame from like leaving this thing behind and being told for so long, and like all this like self oppression, and then finally having freedom that just doesn't feel like it at all. And not, and the thing about freedom is this, is like, it's all self-given. Like and I know, I mean, I don't speak for everybody, because I know that there are people in oppressive situations and physical oppressive situations, like, our prison systems and, sex slavery across the world and all these different kinds of things. And that's not what I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about this, you can leave this oppressive environment and carry it with you. And you do. And
you almost self-censor yourself.
Oh, I still do it. I still catch it sometimes, and I am like, whoa, still.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big part of who you are. Even though you've come out the other side and have done so much work in healing, it's still a big part of who you are.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it sits with you for a really long time. There's so much self-censorship, and, freedom has a lot more to do with like, knowing like where your boundaries are at, knowing how you feel, knowing how you are willing to show up in places, knowing what you believe, and knowing what you're not willing to share with people. And there's just things I'm not willing to share with people. And I'm not going to apologize for that. I will not willingly be misunderstood by somebody anymore. And and so much of that came from this and having to literally relearn how to live, essentially, is what it felt like. So yeah, I mean, I was able to like get through that time period and started trying to date. That was a disaster.
Why was it a disaster? Just lack of confidence and really knowing who you are?
Well, yeah. And I mean, this was, because that relationship ended, and, the relationship ended. He decided to continue to pursue his faith, and he, wanted to go to church. And it was this church that was, completely lovely here in Chicago. And, but every time I went there, it just, I felt sick. I panicked. My hands were shaking. And I didn't want to be there, and I didn't know why. And the way that I describe it to people now is and obviously I know that this is extreme. You don't have to email and tell me, but if you're in a plane crash, you survive and you live and move forward with your life. And anytime you get on a plane again, it's pretty normal to feel nervous, because you were in this thing and you had a traumatic experience. And I was in this thing and had a traumatic experience in it. And so every time I go inside of another one, I just feel uncomfortable and I feel nervous, and it brings back things that I don't want to feel.
And it's just a triggering environment, which is totally understandable.
Yeah. And I certainly wasn't ready at that point. Like I hadn't even identified these things. So we, ended our relationship. I start, dating. It's going poorly because, the first question they ask is, where'd you go to college? And, what have you been doing the last 10 years? And then I don't know any other way to explain it other than, well, I went to so I just started telling people, I went to a Bible college and I had, become a minister, but I decided not to. And then there's this explanation of the last 10 years that I missed most of the stuff. For the majority of the time I lived in Rockford, I didn't have a TV. I didn't, follow, any pop culture by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't listen to normal music. I wasn't supposed to watch rated R movies. I couldn't watch explicit things, anything with bad language or whatever. And there was this thing that would be, it was kind of like what do they call it? A virtue signaling thing. Like people would get up. If a movie was too dirty, they'd get up and leave. And it's so weird to think back. But, I finally realized I got into a relationship, again, and I was having just a lot of issues with anxiety surrounding a lot of different things. And I won't go into that, but there was just a lot of stuff that was coming up that I couldn't figure out. I had this overly submissive attitude. I was having a really hard time being able to express my emotions and my feelings, and I was not connected. There was nothing about my, I'll explain, but I decided to go to a counselor. And I went to this counselor because I was I'm anxious at work. This was 6 years ago because I started going there right when I started this job. So it was I'm really anxious all the time, and I am so worried that I'm going to be fired, and and there was nothing going on that I was, needed to be worried about that, right? Work was going great. It was, my relationship had a lot of, red flags, not anything crazy horrible, but it just was not a healthy relationship. And I just started talking to her. And, we were there for a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden, this program got brought up, and she just is asking questions, and she's so gentle and sweet, and she's playing the long game. Shout out Denise. I love you forever. Denise took one for the team when she took me as a client. And so we start talking. It's about 2 weeks in, and I noticed she's asking me a lot of questions about this. And I'll never forget, she looked over at me and she was like, do you mind if I say something about this church that's not, positive? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, your room. And she was like, I have to say, I think that you were in a cult. And I was like, well, my first thing was well, and then she started very gently repeating back things that I had said to her in consecutive order. Well, Callie, there was a lot of control about what you wore, what you said, who you dated, that whether or not you could work, what you did. And all of a sudden, the list was so long, and she was being so gentle, but I just started to panic because I was like, if she's right, then I don't know what to do. And so she just kept going, and it was almost like one of those flashbacks in a movie. I just started seeing more stuff
almost like through a new lens, right? Like you're looking at it through a lens that isn't your eyes.
Yeah. And I started thinking about all these, we would have snow days, and I would stand out in the snow and pump gas for people for donations to give to the church. I didn't keep the money. They would take us on these trips to Microsoft conferences, and they would make us work for 12 and 14 hours a day and keep all the money. and put us in a hotel. And I kept going through all these different scenarios, and I was like, oh God, that's not normal. That's not normal. That's not normal. And then I started to panic so hard. All of a sudden, it was like I was on my back on her floor and she was putting sandbags on me. And I mean, that's what it felt like. It just felt like an out of body experience. And she is just, I mean, again, took one for the team, taking me as a client. I just have rice all over me. I'm laying in a T-shaped position. The therapy dog is there on my side. Diesel, he always wore a bow tie. He's a real gentleman. He was, locked in on me, and I am just in a full-on panic attack in the middle of the floor. And I am sitting there going, what did I do? And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I was going twice a week at that point. Once we came to terms with this, she's like, I think we need to do twice a week until we can get you to a place that's healthy. I mean, it was like a panic attack a session. And I would end up covered in rice, I on the floor. And then slowly but surely, and she would let me stop if it was just too much that week. Slowly but surely, we just started to unpack and unpack and unpack. And finally, I was able to, call it a cult. And we started to work on the stuff in my mind. And that was the hardest thing, because I was sitting in a car with some people one week, and this was before, it was like the day before one of my therapy sessions. And I told this story to my friend one time, and somebody looked at me and they were like, what kind of music do you like? And I was just like, I didn't know. I didn't know how to answer. And it was so weird. It was just like these weird moments of I hadn't chosen or explored my interests in so long. I had only explored what was best for me and for God in this tunnel. I had only looked at life and possibilities with things that lined directly into, would this move my spiritual life further? Would this move the kingdom of God further? And I just remember being debilitated by this thing. And also I just had shut myself down, and I was sitting in therapy one day and I was telling her about this, and we were talking about my relationship at the time. And I was talking about something, and I was like, but I am okay with it. I was like, I think I do feel unhappiness sometimes. I said, but I'm fine. I'm okay. And she's like, Callie? And I was like, yes. And she was like, you're sobbing. And I think that she could see, or she could see that I couldn't see. I had fully stepped out of my body. I don't know what a better way to describe it than disassociating. And I was sobbing and did not know it. And I was telling her I was okay. I had no clue that there are tears. Just the front of my shirt is so soaked at this point. I remember I had on a green shirt, and I was like, well, I'm glad it's green and not white. And I'm just so detached from my emotions and all of these things. The only thing I could do is panic or stuff everything down and say, everything's okay. We're okay. God's going to get me through this,
There was no space for you. There was no space for you to have an opinion, no space for you to have a feeling. And that's especially, listen, I don't know. I'm stupid about a lot of stuff, but I know that in your 20s, that's when you're developing who you're going to be for the rest of your life. Right. And you didn't get to do that until these moments, it seems where it's what is the kind of music I like? And just your ability to just disassociate so much like that is just because you were never allowed to have feelings, I think, or it sounds like.
Well, the feelings you were allowed to have, you knew you were allowed to have them. You were allowed to be really positive. You were allowed to be super helpful. You were allowed to be compassionate. And all of them not had to be, but all of them were mirrored and mimicked as these extremes. If somebody was going through a hard time, it was, I am here for you, whatever you need. I will be here for you. God is here for you, and it's just even this voice. There are so many things to it. It's this mimicked it's this echo chamber of people like going, this is the way to do it. I'm going to do it too. There was even language. They called it like Christianese. There was language that was used, and it was the same way. Yeah. I mean, it was like it was insular, and it was its own subculture. And I was living out in the world, and I had forced myself to be positive and happy and, you know, submissive and all these different kind of things. And so when all of these feelings, these normal, real, actual feelings started to come up in my body, I could not attach myself onto them because they were wrong. I didn't want to own them. I wanted to be okay. I wanted to be positive. I wanted to be good. And I could not attach to the bad one, to the other things. I couldn't bring myself into them. And I really did look shocked. I felt shocked when she was like, "You're sobbing." And I was like, cool.
Wow. Wow.
I did not know, but thanks.
Shout out to Denise. She sounds like she really did some good work with you. During this time after you exited, did they ever contact you? Did they ever try to get you back in? Like, I don't know, are you scared? Like, what of them? Is it? What's that like?
I believe it or not. I mean, so yes, I had some contact here and there. Like I would see them occasionally because for a really long time I wasn't mad. It took a while into therapy before I could even get mad about it because I felt I was broken at first. I felt just completely broken. I felt really ashamed. I felt super guilty. The guilt, because I had not only been a student there, but I had been there for 10 years and become a leader. And I knew I'd hurt people. And I knew that people, the same way that I was like struggling to function, I knew that I had been a part of other people struggling to function. And I have forgiven myself from that, but it is just still a hard thing to know. That is a hard thing to know that you were a part of. And it's also really important to take ownership in that too, because it negates other people's pain because I am not the only one that feels this way. I'm not the only person that has dealt with this. For everything that I've gone through, there are people who have gone through it tenfold and never received an apology, and they should. And so if I'm the apology they hear, I hope they do, because it's not okay what they went through. And I was a part of it. And so that came first. And that was the hardest part. And then the anger came. The anger lasts a really long time. And it's almost like the stages of grief because you're just grieving this human. And it's this person. When I read those journals, when I look back on the pictures, I don't remember a lot of it. And I don't recognize her. There's just, there's so much to it, and the anger just lasts forever. And when the anger started happening, I could not speak to them anymore. I would go on rampages on like Instagram about things. And I mean, I was mad at everyone, and I was mad at myself, and it took so long to get through that stage because I think there was so much to be angry about. I was angry that I was sad. I was angry that I couldn't feel normal. I was angry that I couldn't connect to men normally, for so long. It took like 9 years before I would be in a room with a married man by myself on purpose, like for any reason, because that was like a huge no-no. The door, and it's not like I'm going into married guys' houses, but like Courtney and Mike are great friends, both of ours who introduced us all, they're neighbors to me, and I'll watch the dog and, or whatever it is. And I'll be at the house and Mike will walk in, and Mike's a great friend and I love him. He's like a brother to me. And for a really long time, if I knew he was like gonna come home and I had the dog, I would just make sure I was gone because I just wouldn't do stuff like that. And I would feel nervous about it. And I would just be nervous that people were, expecting that I was, had bad intentions or like,
Making moves on their
yeah,
husband. Yeah.
it was this rule like flee even the appearance of evil. And so in no way do you leave any room for there to be any appearance of evil in your life. And so I was just that whole thing, I had a really hard time integrating normally, and I was so angry about it. And it's been pretty recent in the last, I'd say, year that I have stopped finally feeling mad. And I think my heart just finally had enough and got it out and processed all of that anger. And I really don't feel anger anymore. And I think that's why it's finally okay and time for me to talk, because I feel compassion, a lot of compassion for a lot of the people either still involved or like still there, because not because I don't think it's wrong, not because I don't think that it's still hurting people. In no way do I, think that. But I think that what I feel compassion for is I know how hard it is to like separate from it. I know how true I believed the things were. I know how real I felt like hell was and demons were, and these things were, going to attack you if you did the wrong thing or couldn't figure this out. And I also like, I don't want to destroy anyone. I just want I want people to understand and like hear that I don't have a critical spirit. I haven't backslidden. I haven't done any of these things. In fact, I'm probably at the best place I've ever been in my life as it pertains to like emotional health and like spiritual health and things like that. But I want organizations, religious organizations in this specific arena, the evangelical movement as it stands, today. I want them to just listen to people who have been involved in this and hear that I'm not trying to burn it all down. I want you to know that like there's a better way to people. There's a better way to bring messages to people. And you have all the ability in the world to like use reason and to be able to ask questions and to have open forums to faith and to not expect people to like become robots. And if there is a healthier way to do it, I just hope that you will, and I have like full forgiveness. I don't have full acceptance of the things, but I have full forgiveness, like for anyone that was like involved and anybody that like was a part of it. I just want it to be different and better. And yeah.
And remember, forgiveness in your case, for anyone, forgiving someone who's wronged you, or in this case, an organization that's wronged you, that is not about them. That's for you. If you couldn't forgive, you would still hold on to that anger, and you would still be that ball of anxiety, and you would still be stuck in that place. And, everybody has a different, I believe everybody has a different, way that they forgive and what that does for them, but it's all good. Letting go of grudges, shedding the emotions, the experiences, the people that are not meant for you, that's for you. They're forgiving them, it doesn't matter to them usually one way or another, and it might give someone peace, or it might hit someone. But I think first of all, I'm proud of you for saying like you forgive them, and I didn't realize that was so recent, that you've kind of been able to let go of some of that. And I know too, you have your art, and I want to hear that. Like, what role has your art played in your recovering? Because I know you shared a little bit with me, but I kind of wanted to get more detail from you in an authentic way. So what role has art played in your healing? And you have you've had gallery shows, I think a couple of weeks ago you were at. So
Yeah.
you're seeing really good success there. What role did that play? How did you tap into that piece of you?
Sorry, I have tissues all over me. Like this tissue, I just wore it to the bottom.
Oh,
Um,
it's
so I hope nobody has me on HT. But yeah, so it's so funny. Like I went through therapy. I was still in therapy when I started painting. And I really needed an outlet. I was going through this like intensive therapy, and I I needed a way to like get out some of these things. And it was really before I was being honest about a lot of what was happening, certainly not publicly. So it wasn't like I could write it down. I mean, I guess I could write in a journal, but a lot of it I just wasn't even ready to say. I couldn't write it. I couldn't like, do any of those traditional forms. I can't sing. No one wants that. And I really just started painting as a way to like figure out. I painted or been like done art my whole life, but this was just different. And I was dating someone at the time, and they were just like into art, and they saw these pieces, and they didn't know I could paint. I hadn't done it regularly. I think it was like 2018 or 2019, and there was this piece they wanted, but I mean, it was like in the millions, I think.
oh,
And
geez.
so I just recreated it, and I brought it over to his house, and he was like, "Where'd you get this?" And I was like, "I painted it." And he was like, "This is like exactly the same." And I was like, "Oh, cool. Good." And then he just kept saying like, "Why don't you paint and sell your art?" And I was like, "I'm not going to do that. Nobody's going to buy it." And eventually just started painting more and more. Had a show randomly in, I think it was 2019, and people started buying it. And I started an Instagram, and, it's just grown and grown and grown. And like last year, some really amazing client of mine, she had a larger following, posted a piece that I had just dropped off. And by the time I got back to my friend's house, to Courtney's house, we were going to plant some flowers that day. My phone was just like freezing. I was getting so many like likes and follows, and my inbox was full with like all these commission orders, and I had to shut off my orders. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy.
Wow.
This thing that I like used like as therapy. And a couple years ago, I don't remember when it was, I did a session, I did a collection of art about my time in the cult, and about just themes and stuff that had happened there. And I got to show it at Keel's on Michigan Avenue. So I had it set up there, and it was really cool. It was a collection called Clean, and it just talked a lot of the themes sort of threaded in and out, but they, a lot of them had a religious nature to them, and about my time there. And it was just really cool to sort of just put that all out and like feel a lot of like good, like a let go vibe, from that.
That's awesome. That's
yeah,
so cool.
It's really cool. Yeah.
That's really cool. So there's one last thing. I love this for you. Like I can't, just the art, the like letting go of the anger. You actually got me thinking. I'm like, I need to let go of some anger, regarding, my experience. And I remember, I talked to Jeremy a few months ago, and I was just like, you know what? I'm running on pure anger. And I hadn't thought about it since, but hearing you say like you released it all a year or so ago, it definitely has me thinking that that's the move, right? That's the way to go. So thank you for that. Even though it's different, there's similarities, when you hold on to that stuff. But I know from part one, right? We've gotten tons. You've gotten way more than me, I'm sure. I've gotten lots of messages from people in various different cults. Some I believe are from the same program as you. You are very brave to speak up. I can imagine that the people who reach out to you are feeling incredibly seen and heard. And this isn't gosh, we're no Joe Rogan, right? We're not even really, I don't think I've ever cracked like the top 100 podcasts, but there's a lot of people listening. And I think a lot of people that are in your life and have been in your life are reaching out to you, and you're an inspiration for them. I think you're going to inspire a lot of people, make a lot of people feel seen. A lot of people are reaching out to you. What's a piece of advice you would give to someone who's maybe been in the situation you have, hasn't had the opportunity to heal, or hasn't had the resources to heal, or thinks maybe they need to make a change, or are in actively, I don't think you're allowed to listen to podcasts, but actively in a program or something? What's a piece of advice that you can give them to help with their healing?
So the thing about it is I know what it's like to be in that place where it just sort of feels like you're underwater, the insulation and this diehard belief. And for some people, they're never going to divert from it. They're going to live in that belief system for the rest of their lives. But I would challenge you that, like, if there is an entity that you are involved in, that you may not recognize the control, you may not recognize, all of the things that I recognize now that I ignored. But if you are being, pulled away from friends and family, even if it's because, maybe they weren't the best for you or this or that, or if you're being like, insulated into this one community, if you are, being told to do things that feel extreme, even though you feel like you might get an extreme reward or whatever it is. If you are just wondering, I think the thing that I would say would be there are never questions that are too big for something that you think is so powerful. So if you think this God or this organization or this leader, if they are as powerful as you think they are, then there is no question that should be too big or off limits. And if you can't ask questions, if you are worried or scared in any way that you might tip the boat, knock it over, sink the boat, whatever it is you're scared of, whatever level of fear you have, if you're too scared or too nervous to ask questions, you're in a place that's unhealthy. And so just think about that. That's all. If there's a seed to plant, like, it's that. And it's okay to leave something, even if you think the stakes are high, even if the stakes are the highest they've ever been. Like, it's okay to leave a place that doesn't feel safe. And for those of you who are going through therapy for the first time, for those of you who are starting to explore that, for those of you who have just been terrified to tell your therapist because you didn't want to go into it, the thing I would just say is just set yourself up for a lot of support, as much as you can, if you can find that, even if it's a forum online, even if it's, whatever it is that you can do to, like, feel supported in the journey, because it is so hard. And I'm not going to say it's like, sometimes it doesn't feel worth it, but it really feels worth it when you get to the place that is peaceful on the other side. The sadness and anger are going to last longer than you think they will, and plan for that and give yourself grace in the middle of that. You're not the best version of yourself when you're healing. But to be honest, like, think about it. Like, you get a burn, it looks way better 5 minutes after you burn yourself than it does 3 days after you burn yourself, because it's healing, it's scabbing, it's doing all these ugly, nasty things. Healing is nasty. It is the nastiest part of the process. And you just have to give yourself grace through that. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be easy. And you will know the people that unconditionally love you, the people that stand by you while you're healing. Those are your people.
That's beautiful. One thing I'll say on my end, I have always been fascinated with cults. I have always wondered, who does that happen to? Like, how do people? And I'm saying this because I want people to know that is how I felt. And I'm a pretty empathetic, non-judgmental person, but I'm like, who does that happen to? And then I've met you, and it's just like if I didn't know, if Mike didn't tell me, like we talked about, last week, if Mike didn't tell me, I would have never guessed, because you're just a normal person who's been through some shit, and we're all normal people who have been through some shit. And sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's scarier. But the whole reason that I wanted to even start this podcast, or have you, share your story on this podcast, is because my bias and judgment caused me to think people in cults were not, on the same level of human being that I function on, or whatever. And it wasn't even a conscious thought. But talking to you, getting to know you a little bit better, hearing your story, I've actually had other people in cults reach out. I've had conversations with, not even just today, but like for some reason that has been in the universe the last couple months. But I just want to say, like, you've changed my perspective, and I want everyone else to, think about that. Like, this could happen to you. This could happen to your family. This could happen to your friends. This could happen to anyone. And the control mechanisms are so good, and the way they kind of exclude you from normality and all of that stuff. So if you know anyone, or you hear a story like this, please, please, please come at that with compassion, come at that with empathy, because it could be you or someone you know or love, and they may not even know it, or may not have known it. So thank you again. Your vulnerability, I want to give you a giant hug, because I know that you've put yourself through it, not just rehashing all this. And listen, when I rehash over and over and over for different interviews, my whole show experience, it messes me up for the day, at least, if not longer, because I'm like, that's so fucked up. Like, I'm so different after that. And then I get angry, right? And it's just so, it's just, I know this wasn't easy. And I want you to know that I appreciate you, first of all, trusting me with it. Second of all, being vulnerable. And lastly, it's not just this conversation, because I know you're going to hear from people, and you're going to be inspiring people. You might get some hate. I hope that the program doesn't, harass you or anything like that. So I know you're opening yourself up to all of that. So, I'm here for you as a friend. Anything I can do with any of that. And thank you for sharing.
No, and thank you so much. I mean, thanks for giving us a platform, because I mean, you did say, I've received so many messages. I told Nick, I was like, it feels like a part-time job, like trying to keep up with, and people are sending, these are people that, some of them I haven't heard from in over a decade. They were at the program, like some of them for close to 20 years. They were like, I was there for a year, or I was a youth group kid, or this or that. And it's just, people are grateful, like, that this story is being told, like this program is being, talked about, and that their story in turn is being told in some form.
And validated.
And so I thank you for like putting this on a platform that, it's not an Inquirer article. It's not, I know the cult thing is like, for people, it sounds like this crazy thing, but it really can be something that, like you said, normal people walking around, they don't want to tell you. It's really shameful. There's a reason I haven't talked about it for 10 years. I'm single. I work a job where I work really hard, and I'm corporate, and I meet people day to day. And I was just worried people would think I was a freak or a weirdo if I talked about it. And so it's not something you can talk about a lot, but I think it's important. And those messages prove it, And so you giving this platform that you have that has so much viewership and so many followers, like, it's so important. And I just really appreciate it so much. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's, that, again, I think I said this earlier, maybe I didn't finish. The whole reason I wanted to start this show is because I know that these issues in the world and in our culture are just so stigmatized. We're so divided on everything. And I know that at the core, we're all human beings, and we all want the same thing, and that we are in this together, and we have to support each other. And we can't support each other if we're hating each other. And so instead of me looking at someone in a cult and being like, how the hell did that happen? I can now look and be like, oh my God, that's a human being that is at their core just looking for peace and looking for a way to get through their life. And that happens to be what was there for them in the moment at that time. And who am I to judge someone for that? I'm nobody. I could be judged for equally stupid things and equally relevant things. So we're all there. And I really hope that this helps people sort of, rethink maybe some of their negativity and the way they think about people.
Me too.
So,
yeah.
Well, thank you. Where can people find you on Instagram for some more commissioned works? And I don't know, you probably shouldn't have said you were single because you're probably going to get some people sliding into your DMs, but brace yourself for that.
Well, you know what you're getting into, so okay. So where you can find me at Instagram, and I ended that with a preposition, sorry. Where you can find me at McMillan Street Art, McMillan Street Art, and it's all spelled out. You can find me there all the time. My new artwork should be going up soon. If it's not already up there by the time this airs. Just had a show. Hopefully we're going to have one more show by the end of the year. I'll post that on my page. I'd love for you guys to follow my art page because that is where I put out little mini stories with each of my pieces and talk about, stuff I'm dealing with, stuff I'm going through. So if that's the community you want, go there.
It's the community you want, all of you. Yeah. That link will be in the description too. So go give it a click and a follow. And thank you again for, everything.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for making such a safe space.
Of course. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.